Good morning. Now, today we're talking about liberty training and possible conflict behaviours that horses exhibit when they're being trained at liberty. Now, I just want to talk about what exactly liberty training is to start with, and then we'll move on to how it's achieved. So, it's really anything where you don't have a head collar or a bridle attached to the horse. So it's with the horse usually traveling around you or next to you and doing all sorts of maneuvers. So it can be taught in the round pen, completely at liberty. It can be taught in the paddock, completely at liberty. Most often it's actually taught to begin with a head collar or a bridle on, and then so the horse gets the pattern, and then they move to doing the same thing without the head collar or bridle. So take the example of, the horse that leads next to you without a head collar. That has obviously been taught with the head collar on, and then the horse learns the pattern that you stay at its shoulder and it moves forward, it stops, it trots, it walks when you do. And so a lot of people look at the end result and say, oh, I love that. I want to train my horse at liberty and not have a head collar on it. But that is the end result. So it's not always the way it's being trained. So it's important to recognize how things are trained. And most often these things are trained with pressure release. So the head collar, so you'll ask the horse to walk forward. If the horse doesn't walk forward, you'll put some gentle pressure on the head collar to ask the horse to walk forward, and you'll release that when the horse does walk forward. And that would be negative reinforcement, pressure release. These things can also be trained using positive reinforcement. So you reward the horse for walking forward. All training is a mixture of the two things. It's very, very difficult to only train with negative reinforcement. It's just in the same way as it's very difficult to only train with positive reinforcement. So I think when we're looking at the end result, then it's important to remember how the movements were taught, because I think also how the movements were taught often tell us why we're seeing conflict behaviors in the end result. Now, by conflict behaviors, I mean horses pinning their ears and swishing their tails. And so that's what I would like you to be aware of when you're watching liberty things. So another reason people teach liberty is for demonstration purposes. So you'll see a lot of horses in demonstrations at shows and symposiums and things like that, working at liberty. And it looks really impressive. Often it really does look impressive, especially when you get 2 or 3 horses, all cantering around together, and it looks great. But if you look carefully at those horses, it's quite interesting to also look at the behaviors they're displaying, because a lot of these behaviors, if we were riding the horse, we would really be worried about the behaviors they're displaying. So the pinning the ears, the swishing the tails, and it's not uncommon to see these behaviors in liberty horses. And just because we're not riding them doesn't mean the horse is still trying to tell us something really important. So I know that, if you were riding a horse that was pinning its ears like that and swishing its tail, you'd get off pretty quickly because you'd know something was really going wrong. Now, just because we're safely on the ground and not on the horse's back is really, no reason not to find out what it is that's going wrong with the horse. So, why do people teach it? Well, I think that it can be really useful. Now, I teach a bit of liberty myself. I had a horse the other day that didn't want to be caught. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. And this horse had, not perhaps has the best history recently of training. And so, the idea of actually not being caught to be trained, that was a good option for him. So I thought, okay, well, we're going to do something about this. So I popped him in the round pen, and I knew, because I'd known this horse for many years ago, I knew that he understood and he had already been taught, come to me. So it's something I teach all my horses, because when I'm standing in the paddock with my head collar, I would rather the horse comes to me than I go to the horse. So I have a cue where I just tap my hip and I ask the horse to come to me. Now, this is a liberty exercise. I do teach it in the round pen, and I start with a horse on the head collar if I need to. Often you don't need to. If you're teaching inside turns, you can just pop the come to me cue onto that, and it's quite easy to teach. If I have a horse, a remedial horse that I need to untrain something like this one was, I can always start it with the head collar on. But this horse, knew the lesson, so I just went back to the lesson in the round pen. So I did a couple of inside turns with the round pen, and then I started tapping my hip and was asking the horse to come to me. Initially, of course, he didn't canter all the way into me, which I wasn't expecting him to, but he stood on the outside and looked at me. So I went and rewarded him for that, praising him, giving him a scratch, and then walking away. And a few more times, and the horse was coming closer and closer and closer until, he was right up to me. So it's very useful for things like that. And training at liberty also in the round pen is very useful for training certain movements. I try and teach flying changes in the round pen. It's useful to see if your horse has naturally clean flying changes. Haunch turns is similar. Very useful place to teach that. So liberty work in general in the round pen can be very useful, but I think we need to be careful as well that we're not overworking the horse, and that we're always watching out for those conflict behaviors, because the round pen is a very safe place when it's properly used, but it quickly becomes quite a nasty place for the horse to be if we're working the horse too hard, if we're ignoring the horse's behaviors, all of those sorts of things. So we do need to be clear on what we're going to teach at liberty before we start. That's the really important thing. Where is the release coming when we start? So what exactly do I want the horse to do? So with my example of come to me for the horse that didn't want to be caught, my initial release came with the horse stopping forward movement and turning and facing me. So even right out on the rail, that was all I needed the horse to do. And then I take that behavior and I shape it so that the horse is coming closer and closer to me each time. What I don't want to do is tire the horse out. So get the horse to run around and around and around and change directions and all of this thing, and then ask it to come to me and have it come to me because it knows that if it doesn't come to me, it's going to be run around and around and around again. I don't want to do that. I don't want to exhaust the horse into submission. I want the horse to learn something. I want to engage the horse's brain. I want the horse to understand that the pressure I'm applying, which is just my body language and just the raising my hand with the lariat to move the horse forward, and then the pressure becomes my tapping my hip. The pressure I'm applying will all go away when the horse does what I'm asking, or when the horse finds the right response in movement. So this response in movement is for the horse to turn and face me and stop. So I go up to the horse and I pat the horse on the face, and then I walk away from the horse. And so what happens is the horse learns that pattern. So what's the pattern? The pattern is go forward, listen for the come to me cue, and then you get patted on the face, and that's the end of the pattern. Then we go back and we go forward again. So what happens is the horse learns the pattern. The last thing in the pattern is the reward, and that's what the horse wants. So the horse speeds up to get to the reward, and we skip the middle bits. And this is the shaping part of this training. So when the horse then goes, oh, okay, well, I need actually to get to the reward so the pattern finishes, and the horse comes closer and closer and closer to me, and the bit it's skipping is the bit where I have to walk from the center out to the rail to pat the horse. So the horse comes closer and closer and closer to me until the horse is actually coming right up to me to get its reward. And there, the horse has learned this really good pattern. What happens when the horse learns a really good pattern like that is he goes reward hunting. This horse is looking for a reward. The reward is positive reinforcement in the form of patting the horse and a kind word, and also letting the horse rest. So there's a few things in there that are positive reinforcement. And I think we often get a little bit confused about positive reinforcement because we think that it has to be food, and it doesn't. I mean, a horse can still hunt for a reward, that isn't food. And I'd much rather the horse was hunting for a scratch than it was for a piece of licorice in my pocket, just in case it bit me in the process. So I think that's very important. And a horse that has learned to hunt for a reward that isn't food, and there's a reason why it's quite important that we don't use food in these sorts of situations, is that that horse won't be displaying the conflict behaviors. See, once we bring something like food into the equation, we're then setting up a sort of a bit of competition, aren't we? Because I might keep the food, I might eat the food, I might give the food to another horse. The food, you know, if you watch horses in the paddock by themselves, you know, with their herd, and there's only one bit of food, the others are going to show conflict behaviors that we're talking about towards their other horses. So let's say I've got 5 horses out in the paddock. I can see them now, and there's only one bit of hay left. And the lead horse is getting that hay, and every now and then he's shooing everybody else off by putting his ears back and sometimes moving in towards them, and he's swishing his tail and he's carrying on. He's making it really clear, you keep away from me. And by introducing food into our training in this sort of situation, especially if you've got more than one horse at liberty, you do invite that. You know, it's absolutely true. You do invite that sort of behavior. So I would rather not use it here. And I also think, you know, sometimes with food, you know, you can't, a big problem with it is you can't increase the emotional level in a nice way with food, in a good way. You can certainly make the horse more emotional, but not in the way you want. So when we're making the horse more emotional, what we really want to do is make the lesson perhaps more challenging for the horse. Get the horse to think more. A lot of our emotions are in our thoughts. So we need to get the horse to think a bit more. And that raises the emotional level in a very nice, controllable way for us, rather than having the horse, because what we're doing is we're directing the horse's mind as well as his energy. So keeping him focused and actually building that bubble, rather than trying to bribe the horse to do something which, you know, may work with some horses and won't work with a lot of horses. So it's a good exercise, and it's a good thing to think of that as liberty work, is that sort of exercise, like come to me. And if you push the horse a little bit faster on the outside, so if you get the horse to trot around the round pen, a little bit faster, and then ask it in, the horse will come to you faster. If you ask the horse to canter around the round pen and then ask it in, the horse will canter to you. It's something that you can shape quite easily and quite successfully, because what the horse does is he speeds up everything to get to the reward, because the horse knows where the reward is. And I think it's a really good, fun thing to do at liberty. I try and only teach things that are going to be useful to me when I'm handling or riding the horse. So that's why, you know, you won't see me do a lot of things. I don't teach horses to sit as dogs. I don't think it's terribly useful. I do teach horses to bow sometimes, because people with disabilities that can't get on the horse find that really useful. So, you know, they're two different things, sometimes useful, sometimes not. I can't think of a use for teaching a horse to sit as a dog. What we often see, you know, horses at liberty that are cantering over jumps by themselves and cantering over people, jumping over horses lying down and those sorts of things. And they're great for demonstrations. You know, it's a lot of fun. It's very entertaining to watch. But again, I don't find that terribly useful in my riding or handling. So it's not something I teach. I also find that if you watch those horses, many of them are displaying a lot of conflict behaviors. And I wonder what is going on with the training that's going so wrong there for those horses. And all you need to do is go onto YouTube and search liberty training and look at some of the horses there and look at their conflict behaviors. Look at their ears and tossing of the head as well. You know, these horses are saying something to the trainers that the trainer is ignoring. And I think it's really important that we never ignore our horses. I really do think it's important. And just because the horse isn't being ridden and doesn't have a head collar or a bridle on it does not mean it's a happy horse. And we need to know why it's not a happy horse. And my guess is that it's probably a confused or frustrated horse. Now, it might be frustrated because it's been trained with food and the food, isn't coming regularly, or it's looking for the food and it's not getting the food. It might be that. It might be a confused horse because the reward, be it food or otherwise, is not consistent. The horse is not getting rewarded consistently. So it's doing the behavior that it's been asked to do, or it feels it's being asked to do, and it's not getting rewarded for that behavior. So I think, again, it comes down to being very, very clear on what you want the horse to do before you ask the horse to do it. And I was talking to someone this weekend about that, and they had a horse that didn't seem to be engaged with learning at all. And when we did increase her emotional level enough to actually engage her with learning, she was displaying some conflict behaviors. We thought, that's quite interesting. And so the owner said, well, she learned hips to the fence really easily and really well, but she's having more trouble with give to the bit. And so we talked about this for a minute. And what we realized was that with hips to the fence, it's really easy to pick where the reward comes in. The reason is because we cue the horse to step its left foot to the left. So as soon as the horse steps the left foot to the left, we release the pressure and we reward the horse with a praise and a rest. So really easy to see. That left foot picks up, puts it down. There we go. That's the reward. It's a bit like the difference between show jumping and judging dressage. Either the horse gets over the jump or it doesn't. It knocks a pole down or it doesn't. But a 20-meter circle or half pass, it might look nice to some people, it might not look too good to others. It's really subjective. And the hips to the fence exercise, when you compare it to give to the bit, it's much easier to see when the horse has done the right thing. So it's much easier to have a really consistent reward for the hips to the fence exercise than it is when you first start out with give to the bit. Because give to the bit, is this enough? Your horse is given a little bit, I think. Is that enough? Maybe I'm not quite sure. Maybe I'll ask a little bit more. So then the horse doesn't get that reward. So I think it's one of those things in the can-do training that we really concentrate on, is finding where the reward is for all of these things. Give to the bit's a terribly important exercise, because what it does is it starts to build that bubble of communication. It starts to get that horse into the engagement zone without tiring it out. It's an engage your brain exercise. And so all horses are different. Some need to be more emotional than others to actually start to connect that pressure with the release. And that's what we need to work out for each horse. And that's why with the can-do training, we spend so much time on give to the bit. And also it's something that, a lot of people send their videos into me of them doing give to the bit. So I can look at that and I can say, right, if that horse is not emotional enough, or the horse is a little too emotional, so it's not focused, try doing this. And sometimes we need to step back from that situation and say, okay, this horse isn't engaging. What can we do to get the horse to start connecting pressure, release? So I'm working a horse at the moment that's not had consistent training. And so he's stopped looking for the pressure. He stopped looking for the release because it simply hasn't been there for him. So my job with him is to really connect that up again. So you can do any exercise, and this is the same horse I was teaching, come to me. It's a great exercise because he starts to hunt the release. And that's what makes an engaged horse, a happy horse, because there's a horse with a job to do. He's looking for something. He's looking for his reward. And so you don't get the nasty ears or the swishing tail or anything like that, because your horse is focused on looking for a reward. And it's not a food reward, it's a praise, it's a positive reinforcement in the form of giving the horse something it wants, which might be a stroke on the neck, or it might be a bit of a rest. And so by making that reward really clear how you get this release and how you get this reward really clear for the horse, they start to hunt for reward and they start to hunt for release. And so the next time you go to teach the horse something, the horse goes, oh, I feel a pressure, or I can see that pressure, or I can hear that pressure. I'm going to find out in movement what I need to move to get that reward. And that's what we want. We want the horse to sort of develop a shopping list type of thing, so it can run through different things that might be a reward for the horse, that might work as a reward. And the horse is likely, it can move any different part of its body in 6 directions: up, down, left, right, back, forward. It can move any part of its body. So every time we put a new pressure on a horse, it's really important that we know exactly which part of the body we want the horse to move and in which direction. Because unless we know that, we can't actually connect that well enough for the horse. We're going to be really blur in our reward. It's not going to come just at the right time for the horse. So with the hips to the fence, we know we want the left foot to move left. So our pressure, our motivator, is to tap the horse lightly on the hip. And when the left foot steps left, we stop tapping, we reward the horse for doing that. It's really, really clear. With some liberty work, it's not that clear. So, it becomes quite confusing for the horse. And I think a lot of the behavior that we see displayed with liberty horses comes from that confusion. It's confusing and therefore frustrating because, if you've got to go all the way around in the circle or whatever it might be, it's just not rewarding enough for the horse. So I think we need to be very careful when we're teaching liberty, that we're being very aware of what the horse is telling us. Don't ignore what the horse is telling you. I'm not saying don't teach liberty. I'm certainly not saying that at all. I'm certainly not saying don't use food as a reward. If you have a horse that's good with food, then great, use food. If that is what you want to do, clicker training, anything else. But I do think you need to be careful of its use as well. I do think, clicker training used well can be great. I really do. But I think the other thing we need to remember about that is it is impossible to increase the horse's emotional level using food as positive reinforcement. Because, unless you're doing it in a competitive sort of thing, then the emotional level does go up, but not in a great way. So I think that's worth keeping in mind. But the other thing I want you to really keep in mind, especially when you're watching liberty, is how was this taught? Because I think that's something that's ignored. I really think it's quite often ignored. And I think it's a real shame, because certainly as a scientist as well, if we look at the studies that have been done, a lot of them just look at the end result. So, let's say a study on rein tension, for example. There's been a couple of studies that have looked at the difference in rein tension in dressage riders and Western pleasure horses. And of course, if you look at them, they're chalk and cheese, aren't they? The dressage riders have a lot of rein tension. The pleasure riders have no rein tension. That's what it looks like. But it's apples and oranges, because how did these horses learn that? What does a reining horse go through, for example, to come out at the end of the day with its chin on its chest and no rein tension? We need to study what these horses are going through to learn these behaviors. My feeling is probably with a dressage horse, it has that much rein tension its entire life. But I would like to know with the reining horse, what happened to get it to that stage. Because it's not what we see on show day that's important. It's what happens to the horse every day, the training. It's how these things are learned. And if you see horses at the end of the day, especially in the round pen, with with these conflict behaviors, then something's gone on. They've been chased, they've been confused, something is going wrong with the training there. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to look at the behavior and then say, right, what has gone wrong? Maybe it went wrong a long time ago. Maybe it's something old that's left over from the horse, or maybe it's something that the horse is still trying to tell the trainer about to this day. So I don't want to discourage you from doing liberty work. I do liberty work myself in the round pen. I do quite a bit of liberty work, and I do a little bit in the paddock as well. It's fun. I always think, there's a lot of fun things we can teach our horse. I just think that you really should be aware of how these things are trained, and don't treat it any differently from anything else you're teaching your horse. You need a spot on the horse you want to move, a direction you want that to go, a motivator, some sort of pressure, be it your voice, your lead rope, your whip, whatever that might be, and a reward and a release. So know when the release is coming and make sure that you're connecting that with your cue. And that's it. I am going to turn the recording off, and I'll stay online if you have any questions.